welcome back to SkuBowl. So as you know, the countdown to the big game is on. And in parallel to that, we're running our own event called SkuBowl, where instead of football, we're talking warehousing, because we want to help you run a better, more efficient, more streamlined warehouse operation. So today you're going to be hearing from Kate Mortenson. She's one of our top solutions engineers, and we're going to be covering things like why a unified naming scheme is so important, how it makes scaling easier, as well as the steps you need to take to actually implement that. So on that note, Kate, welcome to SkuBowl.
Hey, Kieran. Thank you so much for having me.
No problem at all. Okay, so let's dive right into it. First question, let's say I've just moved into a big warehouse. I've been running my operation from my house, then my garage, now a warehouse. I've slowly been upgrading. I want to keep growing. Sky's the limit. So why is getting a unified naming scheme for your product in place one of the most important things you can do?
Yeah, it's a really great question. And we see this a lot with the businesses that work with us. The biggest thing is consistency. It's really easy to overlook why consistency is so valuable for us, but it's going to reduce an amazing amount of errors when you have a consistent naming scheme. That means your entire operation, from the front office staff who's purchasing to the back office staff that's putting it on the shelves, know exactly what that product is without question. It is also really going to help with communication issues when you're trying to discover a problem that might be existing within your inventory. A lot of time gets wrapped up in trying to solve a problem when there's a problem. If you can reduce any barriers to communication issues or confusion, it makes solving that problem a lot faster and a lot easier. What it's also really going to do is allow ease of operations through that whole chain of events. So when you make communication easier, then work happens easier. And when work happens easier, you can do more of it, which brings me to my second point, which is scalability. So as you have this rapid growth, it's really important to pay attention to where you're going to put your energy into your organization as it scales, because scalability isn't just, great, we've got more sales, we've got this great amount of volume and we're growing. It means there's also a lot of work that has to start happening. So we have to figure out ways to make that work easier. Having a unified naming scheme is going to make getting new products in a lot faster, getting them purchased on the shelf and then sold back to your customer. That all happens really fast when you have something that's well-defined and easily understood.
It might just be helpful to walk through like a real-world example of, in terms of a unified naming scheme, how that makes scaling easier. Like, is there something you could walk through?
I've worked with a lot of customers who have started out their businesses in a garage or in a really small-scale warehouse. And they had one or two really top sellers, and that was their core business. And as they started getting more income or they started getting more revenue in, they decided to expand that range of products that they're offering. Without having a unified naming scheme, as they bring in new product lines, they would come up with another type of naming scheme for a new product line. Let's say the original product line was water bottles. And so the SKU name was water bottle A and water bottle B. And then they'll bring in a new line of products that are maybe coffee mugs or thermoses. And so it becomes thermos A and thermos B instead of something like SKU 1, 2, 3, SKU 4, 5, 6, that sort of thing. And as the business just keeps rolling, it's sort of like a snowball effect where it's rolling down the hill and it picks up more momentum. You're picking up more product lines as you go. You have more, you have more revenue to do that. So you just get what you can. Very quickly, it becomes this tangled mess of SKU names. They're different lengths. There's different characters that are in them. So maybe you've gotten to this point where you have a bunch of product names, you need inventory management. So you purchase a solution and you're trying to get your SKUs into that inventory management system. There's no cohesive way to do that if you don't have clean data. So having to take that SKU set and clean it up is really confusing and really time consuming if you don't immediately know what the product is when you see the SKU. A really easy way to get you there is to have a unified naming system. What I've also seen happen is businesses who maybe already have inventory management, but they're wanting to start selling on Amazon or they're wanting to start selling internationally. That means that you have to have a very strict barcoding system. Your barcode is generally going to be a numeric value that indicates what the product is, not necessarily the SKU, but sometimes they're the same thing. Sometimes products have SKUs, but no barcodes. And so this becomes a massive physical exercise of hunting through your warehouse to find products to then put a barcode on it. Or even just doing physical inventory and having to dig through your products and try and find where your stuff is to count it. It's a lot more work than I think people intend for it to be. And it can be made easier with something that's a little bit more streamlined and simplified.
So let's say I'm all in on a unified naming scheme and I want to start implementing that across my business. What are the steps that I need to take to do that?
Something that we talk about here is what we call the SCORE methodology. It's kind of quippy, but it goes in line with SkuBowl. But really, if you follow this, that should help you kind of get things up and running. So the first part of this is simplicity. You want a naming scheme that's going to be very easily understood by everybody in your organization and people outside of your organization. Like your suppliers, oftentimes there's some confusion when you submit a purchase order to a supplier with your SKU on it and not their part number. That can cause a lot of confusion. Best idea would be to have both, but if you have a SKU system that's easily understood and very simplistic, then everybody from manufacturing to in customers' hands will be able to understand what the product is. And an example of that would be, like if we talk about our water bottle example, it could be SKU WTLB for water bottle, and then a dash and maybe like the model number of the manufacturer. Like if their model number is ABC, then it would be WTLB-ABC, and that would be easily understood. Second part of that is going to be compatibility. And this kind of touches on what I mentioned earlier about adopting inventory management system or adopting any other new business systems. You want to make sure that those SKUs are going to be compatible across your entire business suite of software. So what that usually means is you have to pay attention to regulatory standards. If you're going to be doing GS1 barcodes, there's a specific format that those have to follow. So you'd want to be careful with that. And you also want to be careful with special characters and like character limits. Some pieces of software have character limits, so you don't want a SKU that's overly long, and you don't want one that's too short. And then a special character would be like an ampersand or a colon, things like that. We want to make sure we don't use those. Generally, a hyphen or a dash is good enough. Obscurity would be the next thing I would talk about, and that's making sure that you're not being overly ambiguous with your SKUs. You want them to be simple enough to understand at a glance if possible, but you don't want them to be so simplistic that they're easily confused with another product, because that just folds in more confusion, which brings a lot of friction into your operation and slows things down and kind of is a breeding ground for mistakes. So your SKUs should be unique identifiers for each individual product. Next up, we've got relevancy, and that is making sure that your SKU has the relevant data in it for the item. So for instance, if we were talking apparel, that often means the model number, like the model number of the design. Let's say it's ABC is the design. Then you could have a hyphen RD for red because it's the red version of this shirt, and then hyphen and XL for the size. That's a really simple way to name your products. And then as you have, that entire size run of that red shirt brought in, it would be ABC-RD-S for small, -M for medium, and so on. And then lastly, ease of use. It's very expensive energetically to run a business. You spend a lot of time and energy investigating problems, making things simple, making things easier for you. And so any area of your business that you can build in simplicity where you don't have to double question something, you should take that opportunity. And this is one of those places. So ease of use is about considering who has to view the SKU, who has to pay attention to it, and who is going to understand what. Kind of in the same vein as simplicity, but you also want to make sure that this is going to impact your customers. It's going to impact your supply chain. You want to make sure that everybody is going to be able to use the SKU the way that they need to. So that means barcoding, visually reading it, machine reading it, that sort of thing.
I love that. So that's the SCORE methodology. That's gold. Okay. And then any other tactics that we should be thinking about when it comes to organizing a product catalog?
Yeah. So global considerations and like market trends, that's something that, depending on the level of maturity of your business, you're going to have to start paying attention to. So I addressed GS1 codes previously. as a real world example, I worked with a customer who had been making a killing in North America with a particular product line, and they were looking to expand globally. They are not able to trade globally until they had a recognized barcoding system, which is what GS1 codes do. It was a massive exercise that took up a large part of a year for them to get this naming scheme adopted and everything labeled and get everybody trained on how to use it. But since then, they've been able to go into multiple different countries with this product offering. And so it's sort of like, do you want the problem to be a top-heavy problem or a bottom-heavy problem? For them, it was a top-heavy problem. They had reached the limit that they thought they could reach in North America and wanted to expand. But before they could do that, they had to invest a lot of time and energy and money into their business to be able to then expand. If you're starting out and you know you have a goal of going into more global trading, then you might want to consider doing this early on. So it's a bottom-heavy problem. If you have the capital to do it, invest in this sort of architecture early on so that when you're ready to expand, it's not another hurdle that you have to get past. Another thing that I think you should pay attention to is brand awareness. A huge part of e-commerce is your brand, and you're building your brand, right? So your SKU naming scheme, it's not very flashy. It doesn't, it might not be part of your SEO strategy, but it is important because it's going to show up on web pages. There might be a point in time where, especially if it's a product that people reorder frequently, they go to your website and they look for that SKU itself. I've seen it happen before. It's not super common, but it does happen. So you're also going to want to consider your brand identity when you're thinking of your naming scheme. And the way that your SKU might appear on your web page, that's also important. Not as important, but something to consider. And then lastly, I would say is reporting, which is something that's pretty near and dear to me. I work with customers' data a lot. And when you have to run reports to solve problems or to see if something's working, to see where you might be able to become more efficient, your reporting is really going to help with that. And it is a million times easier if you have a unified naming scheme, because often you're going to need to find one thing that's the source of truth within your report, and that should be your SKU. Your SKU should be able to tell the story of where you're at, where you're going, and what you need to do.
That's it. Thank you, Kate, for that insight-packed session and in just 13 minutes. Next week, we've got one more episode 3 of SkuBowl coming, where we'll be talking about warehouse layout, why it matters, why it's just as important for your employees as your customers, as well as walking through some practical ways to keep the most important areas of your warehouse organized. So we'll see you then.
Thanks.